Jiwoo Park stared at the enormous data crystal in her palm, watching as light danced through its facets. The Galactic Academy of Sciences towered around her, its crystalline architecture designed for beings twice her height. "You understand this is merely a formality," Professor Talik said, his four eyes blinking in sequence. "The Lifetime Achievement Test is traditionally assigned to all students, but no one expects completion. Most species work on it for decades." Jiwoo nodded politely. "I understand, Professor. Humans are—" The professor's translation device paused, searching for a diplomatic term. "Interesting additions to our academy. Your homeworld's classification as a death world means your species developed under unique pressures." "That's one way to put it," Jiwoo replied. Professor Daehyun, the head of xenobiology, approached with an air of skepticism. His scale-covered body shifted colors to a dismissive blue-gray. "Ms. Park, consider this an observational exercise. Document your approach even. If solutions elude you, that alone will be valuable research on human cognitive processes." Jiwoo accepted the assignment guidelines, noticing how the other faculty watched her with thinly veiled curiosity and doubt. The humans who had gained admittance to the academy were still novelties, fascinating specimens from a planet that should have killed them. "I'll do my best," she said simply. Little did they know that doing her best meant something entirely different to someone raised on Earth. Jiwoo returned to her small quarters that evening, setting the crystal on her desk. When activated, it projected a swirling mass of equations, diagrams, and theoretical models that filled the entire room. The test was not just difficult, it was designed to be impossible to complete in a single lifetime. Her roommate Subin walked in and stopped, mouth open in shock. "That's the lifetime test? It's huge." "They gave it to me as a joke," Jiwoo said, turning the crystal to examine a particularly complex section on quantum biology. "They think I'll fail." Subin sat on her bed. "Will you?" Jiwoo smiled. "No." That night, while others slept, Jiwoo began her work. She didn't approach the test as the alien professors expected. Instead of starting with the basics and building up over decades, she looked at the whole picture first. It was how humans survived on Earth, seeing connections, finding patterns, preparing for dangers before they arrived. By morning, she had filled 3 notebooks with ideas. When she walked into the academy dining hall, she noticed the alien students watching her with pity. They knew what test she had been given. They expected her to give up soon. Professor Daehyun was sharing a meal with other faculty members when Jiwoo approached his table. The conversation stopped immediately. "Ms. Park," he said, his scales rippling with surprise. "Is there a problem with the test?" "Not a problem," Jiwoo replied. "I have questions about Section 3, the parts on cross-dimensional biology." The professors exchanged looks. Section 3 was typically reached after 5 years of study. "You've reached Section 3? Professor Talik asked slowly. "I looked at all sections first," Jiwoo explained. "Humans tend to see the full picture before filling in details." Professor Daehyun's scales flashed a bright orange, a sign of alarm in his species. "That is not the proper approach. The test is designed to be taken in sequence, building knowledge layer by layer. With respect, Professor, humans don't learn that way, especially not humans from Earth." Another professor, a tall, thin alien named Minhak, leaned forward. "Please explain this human method." Jiwoo thought for a moment. "On Earth, if you hear a strange noise in the dark, you don't spend years studying sound before reacting. You make quick connections between what you know and what might happen. You prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." "Fascinating," Minhak said. "Your species evolved making cognitive leaps rather than following methodical processes." Professor Daehyun seemed less impressed. "Those leaps lead to errors. The test requires precision, not guesswork." "I'm not guessing," Jiwoo said firmly. "I'm seeing patterns that connect different sections. The quantum biology problems in Section 3 relate directly to the temporal mechanics in Section 7. The table went completely silent. A student knowing about Section 7 was unheard of. "We will discuss this later," Professor Daehyun said, his scales now a deep purple. Continue your work, Ms. Park. Document everything. As Jiwoo walked away, she heard Professor Minhak whisper to the others, "What if she actually solves it?" Back in her room, Jiwoo smiled to herself. The professors had built the test with alien thinking, logical, sequential, specialized. But humans from Earth thought differently. They connected ideas across fields. They found shortcuts where others saw only long paths. The test was supposed to take a lifetime. Jiwoo planned to finish it in months. 3 days later, Jiwoo had converted her small dormitory into a chaotic workspace that would horrify the methodical alien professors. Holographic projections covered every surface. Physical notes stuck to walls and multiple simulations ran simultaneously. Her roommate, Minji, another human student studying xenolinguistics, watched with amusement. The professors would have heart attacks if they saw this, Minji said, gesturing to the organized chaos. Good thing they have 3 hearts then, Jiwoo replied without looking up. What fascinated Minji was how Jiwoo approached problems, not in the linear, specialized way taught at the academy, but in explosive bursts of cross-disciplinary connections. Where alien students spent years mastering a single concept before moving to the next, Jiwoo jumped between physics, biology, chemistry, and mathematics with reckless abandon. It's like a puzzle, Jiwoo explained when Minji asked. On Earth, we don't have the luxury of solving one problem at a time. Predators don't wait while you figure out the weather patterns. Professor Daehyun observed Jiwoo's progress during weekly check-ins, his color shifting to confused yellows when she described her methods. This is not how the test is approached, he stated flatly. You cannot simply skip fundamental theoretical frameworks. With respect, Professor, Jiwoo responded. Humans need to see the whole picture first. We fill in details later. The professor departed with a dismissive gesture, convinced her approach would lead nowhere. The next morning, Jiwoo woke early. While most academy students followed strict study schedules, she worked when inspiration struck. Sometimes this meant working through the night or taking breaks to walk around the academy gardens when her mind needed a reset. Minji found her friend standing on a chair, connecting strings between different notes on the wall. What are you doing now? Minji asked, still half asleep. Making connections, Jiwoo said, stepping back to look at her creation. See how the string creates patterns? That's how I see the problems in the test. Minji tilted her head. It looks like a giant spider web. Exactly. Spiders build webs to catch things. I'm catching solutions. Word about the strange human approach spread through the academy. Alien students began finding reasons to walk past Jiwoo's room, hoping to glimpse her unusual methods. Some professors openly dismissed her work as typical Deathworld chaos, while others showed quiet interest. During lunch one day, a tall blue student named Bomi approached Jiwoo's table. Is it true you are working on Section 12 already? Bomi asked, her forearms holding various food items. Jiwoo nodded. And Sections 5, 8, and 23. Bomi's large eyes blinked rapidly. But that is not possible. One must master each section before moving to the next. It would be like building a house from the roof down. Sometimes humans build houses that way, Jiwoo said with a smile. We call it top-down design. Later that week, Professor Daehyun arrived for his check-in with another faculty member, Professor Junho, a specialist in cognitive studies. I requested Professor Junho observe your methods, Daehyun explained, his scales a skeptical green. He studies different learning styles across species. Junho floated slightly above the floor, his gas-filled body contained in a special suit. May I record your process, Ms. Park? Jiwoo agreed and began explaining how she had broken down the test into interconnected puzzles rather than sequential chapters. She showed them how she used color coding to track related concepts across different sections. But this defies the fundamental structure of knowledge acquisition, Professor Daehyun interrupted. Knowledge builds upon previous understanding. Not always, Jiwoo countered. Humans often make creative leaps. We see connections between seemingly unrelated things. Professor Junho moved closer to her notes. Fascinating, Your species makes cognitive jumps that most would consider illogical, yet you arrive at valid conclusions. It's not illogical to us, Jiwoo explained. On Earth, survival often depends on making quick connections. If you see paw prints, bent, grass and birds flying away, you don't analyze each clue separately. You immediately think predator nearby and react. As she explained, Jiwoo pulled up a holographic model of a complex molecular structure from Section 18. For example, this protein folding problem. The test presents it as a biological challenge, but I noticed it follows the same mathematical pattern as the space-time curvature problem in Section 4. Professor Daehyun's scales shifted to a surprised purple. Those sections are not meant to be related. But they are, Jiwoo insisted. Look at the underlying patterns. Professor Junho floated excitedly. She's right. The mathematical foundation is identical, just applied to different domains. When the professors left, Minji returned from her classes to find Jiwoo laughing. What happened? Minji asked. I think I just broke Professor Daehyun's worldview, Jiwoo said, returning to her work. That evening, rumors spread through the academy about the human who approached the lifetime test like no one had before. Some students dismissed it as human recklessness. Others wondered if there might be something to learn from the Deathworlders after all. This makes no sense, Jiwoo muttered, staring at calculations that refused to align. 23 days into what was supposed to be a lifetime project, she'd hit a wall. The relationships between subspace dimensions and biological adaptation rates seemed fundamentally incompatible. Her friend Hyun-woo, another human studying astroengineering, sat across from her in the academy cafeteria. Maybe you're overthinking it, he suggested, taking a bite of something that resembled blue spaghetti. The professors designed this to be unsolvable in a human lifetime, Jiwoo said. It's like they want us to admit defeat. Or maybe they just think differently, Hyun-woo shrugged. You know how the Grillorian students hibernate between study sessions? Their brain chemistry reorganizes during sleep cycles. Jiwoo froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Say that again. They hibernate? No, about brain chemistry reorganizing. Oh, yeah. Professor Tail mentioned it in xenophysiology. Their neural pathways physically rearrange during sleep, preserving long-term memory structures while… That's it, Jiwoo exclaimed, startling nearby alien students. The solution isn't in the equations. It's in the approach to time itself. She rushed back to her dormitory, leaving Hyun-woo confused but used to human spontaneity. 3 days later, academy administrators received an alert. A student had submitted a completed section of the Lifetime Achievement Test. When they saw it, was from a human who had only received the test 26 days prior. Emergency meetings were called. Jiwoo barely slept for those 3 days. Her room became even more chaotic, with food containers piling up and unwashed clothes scattered about. Minji worried but knew better than to interrupt when her roommate entered what humans called the zone. What Jiwoo realized was simple yet profound. The test wasn't just testing knowledge but perspective on time itself. Most galactic species lived for centuries. Some, like the Grillorians, experienced time differently through hibernation cycles. The test was designed with these varied time perceptions in mind, but humans were different. Their short lives made them see time as precious, limited. Where other species saw a leisurely intellectual journey, humans saw a race against the clock. Time isn't just a dimension, Jiwoo muttered as she worked. It's a perspective. She began reworking entire sections of the test based on this insight. The problems that seemed unrelated suddenly connected when viewed through the lens of relative. Time perception, biology, physics, mathematics, all linked by how different species experience the passage of time. On the morning of the 3rd day, she completed Section 37, a section most students reached after 40 years of study. Her hands trembled as she submitted it through the Academy's official channels. Within an hour, her communication device buzzed with urgent messages. The first was from Professor Daehyun, demanding her immediate presence at his office. The second was from the Academic Council scheduling an emergency review. The third was from Hyun-woo. What did you do? When Jiwoo arrived at Professor Daehyun's office, she found not just him, but 5 other senior faculty members waiting. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to outrage to fascination. "This is impossible," Professor Daehyun said without greeting her. His scales had turned an intense red-orange that Jiwoo had never seen before. Section 37 requires mastery of 17 previous sections. "I didn't approach it sequentially," Jiwoo explained. "I saw how all sections connect through temporal perception." Professor Tail, who taught xenophysiology, leaned forward. "Explain." "The test assumes students will experience time as most galactic species do, as an abundant resource. But humans see time differently. We know our lives are short, so we look for shortcuts, connections, ways to compress learning." "So you cheated?" accused another professor, a tall insectoid being named Do-hyun. "No," Jiwoo said firmly. "I solved it differently. The Grillorian hibernation cycles gave me the key. They experience time discontinuously, rebuilding neural pathways during sleep. Humans do something similar when we make intuitive leaps." Ibra pulled up her solution on a holodisplay. "Look here. The biological adaptation formulas in Section 15 match the subspace dimensional shifts in Section 22 if you factor in relative temporal perception." The professors huddled around the display, murmuring to each other in their native languages. After several minutes, Professor Tail spoke. "Her solution is correct, unorthodox, but mathematically sound." Professor Daehyun's scales slowly shifted, from angry red to a confused purple. "This approach was not intended, but it works," Jiwoo said simply. Word spread quickly through the academy. By evening, students and faculty alike were discussing how a human had completed in 26 days what took most species decades. Some claimed it must be a mistake. Others suggested human brains might have unknown advantages. That night, as Jiwoo finally slept for the first time in days, the academic council met in emergency session. The implications were staggering. If humans could approach problems this way, what else might they accomplish? What other assumptions about intelligence might be wrong, and more urgently, what would happen when Jiwoo tackled the rest of the test? The academic council chamber was designed to intimidate, with elevated seating for professors surrounding a lone presentation platform. Jiwoo stood calmly at its center, facing skeptical gazes from a dozen species. Professor Daehyun's scales had darkened to an accusatory purple. "Ms. Park, you claim to have solved the temporal paradox section of the test, a section that, I must remind the council, took the renowned Axtillerian mathematician 83 years to partially solve." "I didn't solve it the way an Axtillerian would," Jiwoo acknowledged. "I solved it the way a human would." "And you expect us to believe that in less than a month I expect you to evaluate my solution on its merits?" Jiwoo interrupted, earning gasps from the assembly. Interrupting a senior professor was unprecedented. She projected her work onto the chamber's displays. "Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day. We don't have centuries to solve problems. When a predator is chasing you, or a storm is coming, or a disease is spreading, you adapt or you die." The room fell silent as the professors examined her approach. Where they expected linear progression through established theorems, they found intuitive leaps and cross-disciplinary connections that shouldn't have worked, but did. "This methodology is unorthodox," admitted Professor Tail, "but I cannot find fault in the conclusions." "It's because humans don't separate knowledge the way the Academy does," Jiwoo explained. "On Earth, survival means seeing how everything connects. We're pattern seekers by evolution." Professor Daehyun's scales shifted to a reluctant shade of acceptance. "Your species perceives reality differently than we anticipated." The grand chamber felt colder than usual. Jiwoo could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, not just the council members but students and faculty who had been permitted to observe this unusual hearing. Some looked angry, others curious, and a few seemed excited. "Professor Daehyun," said Council Head Jaehwan, a tall being with crystalline features, "your evaluation of the human solution?" Professor Daehyun floated forward. "I have reviewed it thoroughly. The approach violates 17 standard academic protocols. It references theories out of sequence. It combines disciplines that are traditionally separate. He paused, his scales shifting colors rapidly. And yet, the mathematics is sound. The conclusions are valid. A murmur spread through the chamber. How can this be? Asked Professor Sunmi, an ancient gaseous entity contained in a hovering suit. The temporal paradox requires mastery of quantum probability fields that take decades to understand. Jiwoo stepped forward. May I demonstrate? The council head nodded. Jiwoo brought up a new display showing Earth. This is my homeworld. Every day presents challenges. Extreme weather, earthquakes, predators, diseases. Humans who survived didn't have time to study each threat separately. She showed images of early humans hunting, building shelters, creating medicines. We developed what you might call cognitive shortcuts. We see patterns quickly, make connections between unrelated fields, and trust intuitive leaps. Professor Yoongi, a small six-legged being, leaned forward. But intuition is not science. With respect, Professor, intuition is the beginning of science, Jiwoo replied. It's the moment we see a connection before we can prove it. She displayed her solution to the temporal paradox. Look here. The traditional approach treats time as absolute, but I saw that if you view time as relative to perception, the paradox resolves itself. Professor Tail moved closer to the display. She combined the biological time sense research from Section 42 with the quantum mechanics from Section 6. No one has ever connected those sections before. Because they are not meant to be connected, Professor Daehyun said, his scales now flashing with agitation. But they are connected, Jiwoo insisted. Everything is connected if you look broadly enough. A young professor named Jaeyoon, known for revolutionary theories in dimensional physics, stood up. I've been reviewing Ms. Park's work since she submitted it. What she's done isn't just solving the test differently, she's discovered a new theoretical framework. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some professors argued loudly that this violated all academic tradition. Others leaned over displays, pointing at Jiwoo's work with growing excitement. Jiwoo stood calmly amid the chaos. This reaction wasn't surprising. It reminded her of academic conferences on Earth when paradigm-shifting ideas were presented. Finally, Council Head Jaewon raised his hand for silence. Ms. Park, your approach challenges thousands of years of academic tradition. Yes, Jiwoo said simply. And you understand why many find this disturbing? I do. But knowledge doesn't care about tradition. Reality is what it is, regardless of how we study it. Professor Daehyun's scales had gradually settled into a deep blue, a color Jiwoo had never seen on him before. Council members, he said slowly, I have spent 3 centuries teaching at this academy. I have seen many brilliant minds, but never have I seen someone approach knowledge as this human does. He turned to face Jiwoo directly. I do not understand your methods, but I cannot deny your results. Jiwoo bowed slightly. Thank you, Professor. This council will deliberate, announced Jaehwan. Ms. Park, you have given us much to consider about humans, about knowledge itself, and perhaps, he paused, about our own limitations. As Jiwoo left the chamber, students crowded around her, humans with proud smiles, aliens with curious questions. Something had changed. The academy would never be the same. 5 months and 12 days after receiving the impossible test, Jiwoo submitted her final solution. The academy hadn't just been stunned, it had been transformed. Jiwoo stood before the Grand Assembly, no longer a curiosity but a respected colleague. Professor Daehyun, now her most vocal supporter, introduced her to the gathered representatives from 100 worlds. When we classified Earth as a death world, he began, his scales now a respectful gold, we assumed its inhabitants would be physically robust but intellectually limited. We were half right. Laughter rippled through the assembly. What we failed to understand was how Deathworld evolution shapes cognitive processes. The human approach, what Ms. Park has demonstrated, reveals blind spots in our established methodologies. Jiwoo stepped forward. The lifetime achievement test wasn't impossible. It was just designed with certain assumptions about time, specialization, and linear progress. Humans think differently because we had to. The Academy Council announced the establishment of the Department of Integrative Problem Solving, with Jiwoo as its youngest instructor. More significantly, they revised entrance criteria for other Deathworld species previously dismissed as unsuitable for advanced education. As she left the assembly hall, Jiwoo found Professor Daehyun waiting. "You have changed how we understand intelligence itself," he said. Jiwoo smiled. "That's what humans do best, Professor. We adapt, and then we change everything around us." In the years that followed, the Galactic Academy would never be the same, and across the stars, other Deathworld species began receiving unexpected invitations to join an institution that had finally learned an important lesson. Intelligence comes in many forms, and sometimes the harshest worlds produce the most remarkable minds. The great hall of the Academy glowed with soft blue light as Jiwoo walked across the stage. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy watched as she became the youngest recipient of the Academy's highest honor, the Stellar Mind Award. On the front row sat Minji, Hyunwoo, and 7 other humans who had been admitted after Jiwoo's success changed the admission rules. Behind them sat students from 5 other Deathworld planets, beings who would never have had a chance at the Academy before. 5 months ago, I was given a test designed to last a lifetime. Jiwoo began her speech. Today I want to talk about what that means. The crowd listened silently as she explained how completing the test had never been about being smarter than other species. Different worlds create different kinds of thinking, she said. Earth taught humans to connect ideas quickly, to see patterns others might miss, to solve problems using whatever tools are available. She looked at Professor Daehyun, whose scales now shimmered with a proud gold color so different from the dismissive blue he had shown when they first met. "But we have much to learn from all of you too," Jiwoo continued. "The careful deep thinking of long-lived species, the unique perspectives of hive minds, the precision of crystalline beings." After the ceremony, Jiwoo walked through the Academy gardens with Professor Daehyun. New buildings were under construction. The Department of Integrative Problem Solving was growing quickly. "The first students from Rigel 7 arrive next week," the professor said. "Another Deathworld species. They solve problems differently than humans. They use shared dreaming to find solutions." "I'm excited to learn from them," Jiwoo said. "You know," Professor Daehyun said, his scales shifting to a thoughtful blue-green. "For centuries we believed intelligence evolved in only one direction, toward careful, methodical thinking over long periods. We were wrong." They stopped at a new statue in the center of the garden. It showed hands and appendages from different species, all connected in a circle. "The Academy has changed more in 5 months than in the previous 5 centuries," Daehyun continued. "Some of the older professors still resist, of course," Jiwoo nodded. "Change is hard but necessary." That evening, Jiwoo met with students from 12 different species in her new classroom. On the wall hung a simple sign: "There are many ways to solve a problem." "Today," she told her students, "we begin by forgetting everything you know about how knowledge works." A tall, tentacled student raised an appendage. "Professor Park, is it true you solved the lifetime test by breaking all the rules?" Jiwoo smiled. "I didn't break the rules. I just saw different rules." As night fell over the Academy, lights glowed in windows across the campus. In laboratories and study rooms, students and professors were trying new approaches, combining fields that had been separate for millennia. In her office, Jiwoo looked at a message from Earth. More human students would arrive soon. And not just humans, beings from all the worlds once dismissed as too harsh, too dangerous to produce proper intelligence. The Academy was becoming something new, and across the galaxy, other institutions were starting to follow its example. Professor Daehyun had been right, Jiwoo thought. She hadn't just completed a test. She had changed how the galaxy understood intelligence itself. And this was just the beginning. The end